Snow crunched beneath my shoes as I approached the Grand Sullivan estate, my gloves damp from the icy wind. The house glowed like a jewel, laughter spilling from behind the tall windows. I straightened my coat, trying to smooth the wrinkles in my dress, but my hands still smelled faintly of motor oil. "Margaret? You're late." My daughter-in-law's sharp voice cut through the warmth of the hall as I stepped inside. Heads turned. Whispered laughter brushed against my ears like cold needles. I forced a smile, feeling every eye measure me, noting my threadbare scarf and the mud on my shoes. The morning sunlight fell softly across my kitchen, glinting off the worn wooden table where a chipped mug waited, steam curling like a quiet sigh. I poured my coffee slowly, savoring the warmth as it seeped into my hands. The house was quiet, too quiet for a widow used to laughter and small arguments that never happened anymore. My cat, Jasper, rubbed against my ankles, purring, as if reminding me that even small creatures expected care. I dressed in careful layers, a modest blouse, a knitted cardigan my late husband had liked, and brushed my hair until the knots yielded. Looking into the mirror, I saw lines that told stories of long nights, hard work, and small triumphs no one celebrated. But I liked who I was. I always had. After breakfast, I gathered the parcels for the local shelter. Helping others had become a quiet rhythm in my life, a soft counterpoint to the loneliness that lingered like dust in corners. I loved the predictability, the gentle satisfaction of being useful. And yet, sometimes it felt like the world outside didn't notice. By mid-morning, I was at the flower shop, arranging bouquets for the elderly residents at the nursing home down the street. Each petal, each ribbon mattered. Mrs. Thompson, who had been silent for weeks, smiled when I handed her a small bouquet of white daisies. "You always know just what to bring," she whispered. My chest warmed with a modest pride. These moments reminded me who I was beyond the labels of widow, mother-in-law, or outsider. Then came the phone call. My son, David, sounded a little rushed. "Mom, remember tonight is Amanda's family party. Big one. I know you'll be there, right?" His tone was casual, but I caught the slight edge of worry in his voice. "Of course," I said. "Wouldn't miss it." I hung up and stared out the window at the softly falling snow. The Sullivans' world was glimmering, polished and cold, diamonds and crystal, champagne flutes and perfect smiles. I belonged to a world of simpler textures, warm mugs, quiet laughter, and hands that grew calloused from honest labor. And yet, tonight, I would step into theirs, carefully balancing dignity and humility. I packed my bag, a small notebook, my gloves, and a spare scarf. I paused, listening to the wind whistle against the window pane. It tugged at my coat, insisting I hurry. There was a strange thrill in leaving the calm of my own rhythm for a night in someone else's glittering world. Outside, the snow pressed cold against my cheeks. I shivered, tightening my scarf. The street was empty except for the crunch of my own boots, the smell of wood smoke drifting from chimneys. My mind wandered. Amanda's sharp remarks from the last visit, the subtle, constant judgments of her family, the way I never quite fit. I inhaled, grounding myself. Tonight, I would not shrink. I would go, smile, and endure. Little did I know, the world I carried in my coat pocket, the warm heart, the gentle instincts, the patience and strength, was about to collide with theirs in a way that would shift the very balance of power. I remembered the first Christmas after Amanda and David married. The house gleamed with gold ornaments and the scent of roasted chestnuts, a warmth I wanted to step into, but every step felt measured, observed. Amanda had smiled at me, but it was a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her mother, Evelyn, had hovered, commenting casually on my dress. "Oh, Margaret, that's very cozy." The word cozy felt like a polite dismissal, a subtle mark of inferiority. I had laughed politely, adjusting my scarf, pretending not to feel the sting. But in the mirror later, I traced the wrinkle of tension that had formed between my brows, realizing that no matter how carefully I tried to fit in, I would always be slightly out of place. It wasn't just clothing or manners. At the family dinners, I noticed the way glasses paused midair when I entered a room, the half-smiles exchanged between Amanda and her cousins, the polite yet cutting comments veiled as jokes. "You're so practical, Margaret," Amanda once said while pouring tea. "It's refreshing in this world of frivolity." I smiled, but inside, a quiet ache bloomed. The words were meant to flatter, but they carried a weight I could not ignore. The weight of being constantly assessed, measured, and found tolerable but not truly welcome. The breaking point came during David's birthday last spring. Amanda's family had arranged an elaborate celebration at the country club. I had brought a simple, heartfelt gift for David, a leather-bound journal I knew he'd wanted. As I handed it to him, Amanda's sister, Vanessa, smirked. "Oh, how quaint," she said, loud enough for half the room to hear. Heads turned. David's forced smile faltered. Later, when the cake was cut, Amanda whispered, "You really don't have to try so hard, Mom." She didn't look at me. She looked past me, as though I were a shadow, a minor inconvenience in her meticulously curated evening. I forced another smile, nodding, tasting the bitterness of humiliation that crept slowly down my throat. It wasn't only public moments. The small betrayals accumulated like snowdrifts against a fence, subtle, silent, relentless. Invitations lost in the mail, last-minute cancellations, dismissive remarks about my cooking or home. They never said anything cruel outright, but cruelty doesn't always arrive in sharp edges. Sometimes it's the absence of warmth, the invisible walls that separate you from belonging. And yet, I tried. I reminded myself that patience had its virtues. I tried to remember that David loved me, and that should be enough. But at night, lying awake in the quiet house, I counted the tiny indignities one by one, and a fire began to flicker, a low, steady burn of injustice, waiting for a spark. One afternoon, months before that fateful Christmas, I had visited Amanda's office to drop off some homemade preserves. I was greeted by polite but dismissive nods. Amanda's coworker muttered, "Your mom's very earnest." Earnest. That word hit me like a stone in the chest. I walked back to my car, jar in hand, smelling of sugar and vinegar, feeling small, almost invisible, and a quiet resolve began to form, like ice under snow, solid and patient, waiting. By the time winter arrived, the pattern was clear. Amanda's family thrived on appearances, prestige, and subtle social dominance. They measured kindness and humility as curiosities, not as virtues. Every party, every dinner, every casual encounter reminded me of my outsider status. I could endure it silently, but I would not be diminished quietly. That winter morning before the Christmas party, as I bundled up and looked out at the snow-covered street, I could still feel the echoes of those moments, the stifled laughter, the whispered judgments, the polite dismissals. And somewhere beneath the ache of exclusion, a seed had been planted. Not hatred, not spite, but clarity. I understood then that the world I was about to enter that night would not see me as just a mother-in-law. They would see me as something entirely different, whether they liked it or not. The question wasn't whether I belonged. The question was how I would claim the respect they had always withheld. This sets the stage for Margaret's internal fire and the stakes of social betrayal, which will naturally lead into the next part, triggering conflict, where the immediate tension of the Christmas party begins. The grand doors of the Sullivan estate opened before me, warm light spilling onto the snow like liquid gold. Music and laughter flowed through the hall, a polished hum of wealth and celebration. I adjusted my gloves, smoothing the wrinkles in my coat, and took a deep breath. This was it. The moment I would try to endure gracefully. "Margaret." Amanda's voice cut through the din, sharp and precise. She stood near the fireplace, glass of champagne in hand, her designer dress sparkling under the chandelier. I forced a polite smile. "Good evening, Amanda." Her eyes flicked over me, lingering briefly on my slightly wrinkled scarf and the faint mud on my boots. She raised an eyebrow. "Ah, you made it," she said, each word carefully measured. "Took you long enough." I felt the familiar prickle of shame, the heat rushing to my cheeks. My son, David, tried to intervene. "Mom." "No, David," I whispered, stepping forward. "I wanted to enjoy the walk here." My voice was steady, though my hands trembled slightly inside my gloves. Amanda's mother, Evelyn, approached with a tight-lipped smile. "Margaret, darling. It's quite chilly outside, isn't it?" Her tone was polite, but the underlying mockery was unmistakable. "I do hope the snow didn't tire you too much." I nodded, taking in the room. Crystal chandeliers reflected off polished floors. Laughter came in measured intervals, punctuated by the soft clinking of glasses. Every eye that landed on me seemed to weigh and measure my worth. Mother-in-law, outsider, interloper. I moved toward the refreshments, my heels clicking softly against the marble. A young woman nearby whispered something to her companion, glancing at me. I caught only a fragment. She's trying so hard. Trying. That word again. Always trying, never succeeding. Always visible yet invisible. I felt the old sting rise in my chest. My fingers curled around the glass I picked up, the cool crystal grounding me. But the fire in my chest flickered, hungry for more than patience. Then it happened. In the hallway, near the grand staircase, a commotion caught my attention. A sleek car had stopped outside. The engine had stalled in the cold. I glanced toward the window. A woman was shivering violently, coat thin, gloves missing. Without thinking, I rushed outside, abandoning the careful composure I had practiced. "Are you all right?" I asked, voice firm against the wind. My hands went to her coat, adjusting it, checking the frozen zipper. Her breath came in sharp clouds. I can't get the engine started," she whispered. I rolled up my sleeves and pushed aside my gloves. "Let's take a look." I crouched beside the engine, fingers stiff and numb, working quickly. My scarf had loosened, hair falling into my eyes, clothes smudged with oil and soot. Minutes passed, the wind biting at exposed skin. Finally, with a turn of the key and a soft cough, the engine roared to life. Relief flooded her face. She reached for my hand. "I can't thank you enough. You didn't have to." I smiled, brushing hair from my forehead. "Just a bit of help, that's all." As we spoke, headlights revealed her identity. I froze. Elellanar Wittmann, the powerful matriarch of Amanda's extended family, stood before me, her icy gaze softened by a small, approving smile. "Margaret," she said, her voice carrying over the snow, "I've heard a lot about you. You are remarkable." Inside, the party continued, oblivious to this unexpected encounter. Amanda, watching from the window, paled slightly. The whispers began, heads turning to follow the unfolding scene. My chest swelled with a quiet triumph I hadn't expected, and for the first time, the fire inside me burned with clarity. I realized in that instant that respect and dignity were not given by invitations or appearances. They were earned in actions, in courage, in the small moments that revealed true character. And sometimes those moments arrived in the cold, messy, inconvenient places, the very places the polished world above could never see. The house was quiet when I returned, the snow still soft on the edges of the driveway. I hung my coat, brushing off flakes, but my mind was ablaze with thoughts I could not silence. The encounter outside with Elellanar Wittmann replayed over and over, like a film stuck on a single frame. I sank into my worn armchair, feeling the ache in my hands from the frozen engine, the chill still lingering beneath my skin. Jasper leapt onto my lap, purring as if sensing the storm of emotions within me. I ran my fingers through his fur, but my mind refused the comfort. I couldn't unsee the contrast. The warm, polished world I had just left, filled with measured smiles and whispered judgments, versus the raw reality of helping another human being and being seen for it. I thought of Amanda, of Evelyn, of all the subtle slights and dismissals. Each memory pressed against me, a stack of invisible weights. The birthday party, the polite mockery at dinners, the quaint comments, everything I had endured. And yet, this small act outside had shifted something. It was proof that the world of appearances was brittle, and the true measure of a person was far deeper than glittering gowns or crystal glasses. I rose and began pacing the room, hands clasped behind my back, thoughts circling like hawks. I remembered David's hesitation, the worry in his voice as he reminded me about the party. I had gone anyway, though late, because I wanted to honor him. But in doing so, I had stumbled into something far larger than a social gathering. The fire inside me grew steadily. It wasn't anger, exactly, but a sharp, steady awareness of truth and possibility. For decades, I had endured polite cruelty, invisibility, and the constant weighing of my worth against glittering standards that were never mine. But now, I could see a path, a way to reclaim not just dignity, but clarity, to expose the hollowness that masqueraded as prestige, to show that virtue was stronger than pomp. I sat at my small writing desk, pen in hand, and let the words flow onto the paper. Not letters, not plans yet, just thoughts. I wrote about every instance of exclusion, every moment I had been overlooked, every carefully veiled insult. I catalogued them not with bitterness, but with precision, like a scholar compiling evidence. My hand trembled at first, then steadied. Each memory, each slight, became fuel, a ledger of injustice I could no longer ignore. Sleep eluded me that night. I wandered the house in the dark, listening to the wind rattle the windows, the soft hum of the radiator, the distant sound of traffic. I traced the edges of every corner, imagined every path I might take, every conversation I might steer, every truth I might reveal. In the silence, I realized that action didn't have to be loud or vindictive. It had to be deliberate, careful, undeniable. By dawn, my plan had taken shape. Not a plan of retaliation and anger, but a strategy of clarity, of exposing reality with quiet authority. I would show the truth behind appearances. I would demonstrate that kindness, courage, and integrity carried weight no champagne glass could measure. I poured another cup of coffee, the warmth grounding me. The snow outside had stopped, leaving the world soft and still. I looked out at the street, imagining Elellanar's approving gaze and the subtle shift it had caused. It was not recognition that I craved, though it mattered. It was proof that my actions, my values, my quiet persistence, could not be dismissed. For the first time in a long while, I felt fully awake, not to the world of pretense, but to my own power within it. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be obstacles, missteps, doubts, and moments of fear. But the fire had been lit, and as I traced the rim of my mug with a callous finger, I whispered to myself, soft but firm, "They will see. They will know. And nothing can take that away from me." The following days blurred into a rhythm of careful observation and small, deliberate actions. I began by revisiting every detail of the Christmas parties, every casual insult, every whispered dismissal. I documented them in neat, precise notes, dates, comments, reactions. It was tedious work, but meticulousness would be my ally. Every slight became evidence, every memory a thread I could pull. I started with small, subtle interventions. When Amanda's mother commented on my dress at the next gathering, I quietly smiled and redirected the conversation. I listened closely to the murmurs around me, noting not just what was said, but how it landed, who nodded, who smirked, who looked away. Social nuances were weapons if wielded with care. Yet progress was slow. At first, I stumbled. I misjudged a few interactions. My words fell flat or were ignored. At one dinner, I offered a thoughtful comment on a shared family anecdote, hoping to show insight and connection. Amanda's cousin, Julian, laughed and said, "Oh, you mean like someone from a cozy little town would?" The word cozy hit again, sharp and dismissive. I bit my tongue, nodding politely, but inside, I catalogued the moment as data, a reminder that subtlety alone was not enough. I realized I needed leverage beyond observation. I began reaching out quietly to Elellanar Wittmann. Our encounter in the snow had been brief, but her approving glance lingered in my memory. A letter of thanks, carefully worded and modest, was my first attempt. I described the encounter without embellishment, emphasizing the practical steps I had taken to help her. I avoided praise-seeking language, sticking to facts, letting her judgment speak for itself. The response came faster than I expected. Elellanar's note was brief, formal, yet unmistakably approving. She had mentioned my presence of mind and unassuming courage. It was subtle, but it validated every quiet act I had performed, and more importantly, it became the seed for credibility among the social elite who had once dismissed me. With that connection established, I began weaving my strategy. At the next gathering, I quietly shared useful insights, details about local charities, community initiatives, even practical suggestions for holiday planning. Each intervention was small, easily overlooked, yet demonstrably valuable. Gradually, heads turned. Murmurs shifted from polite dismissal to tentative respect. But setbacks were inevitable. Amanda noticed the change and grew more guarded, occasionally lashing out in passive-aggressive comments. At one dinner, she muttered, "I suppose we could use your practical approach after all." I smiled, inwardly noting the word suppose as both a challenge and an admission. Small victories often carried their own resistance. Financial missteps threatened to derail my subtle rise. Amanda attempted to publicly question my knowledge of proper etiquette during a charity auction, suggesting I had donated incorrectly. I had to quietly double-check my donations, verify receipts, and discreetly ensure all records were accurate. It was exhausting, but necessary. Every detail mattered. I also faced internal struggle. Doubts crept in during long nights. Was I doing this for recognition or for truth? Was I falling into the trap of revenge for revenge's sake? I wrestled with these questions, pacing my small apartment, hands clasped behind my back, Jasper at my feet as a silent witness. Each night, I reminded myself of the principle guiding my actions: clarity, dignity, and truth. Slowly, the cumulative effect of small actions began to show. Family members whispered behind their hands, noting my competence, my resourcefulness, my quiet confidence. Even Amanda's own gaze, once sharp with judgment, softened at times, betraying unease. The change was subtle, invisible to anyone not paying close attention, but undeniable to me. There were moments of anxiety, late nights poring over guest lists, double-checking facts, rehearsing conversations. Once, I nearly backed down, exhausted from the constant vigilance and subtle maneuvering. But I could not. Each moment of hesitation reminded me of the countless dismissals I had endured. I drew strength from memory. The birthday party, the whispered judgments, the quiet humiliation. That fire, steady now, refused to be extinguished. Finally, one evening, the opportunity presented itself unexpectedly. A private conversation between Amanda and Elellanar, overheard while I brought refreshments, revealed that Amanda had been relying on family prestige alone, underestimating the practical insight and quiet judgment that I now carried. Every subtle act I had made, every well-timed observation, every quietly offered solution, every record of past indiscretions, was a brick in the foundation of inevitable recognition. I retreated to the quiet of my apartment that night, feeling the slow, steady pulse of strategy taking shape. The path was clear now. Exposure through truth, not dramatics; dignity, not vengeance; precision, not impulse. Every setback had honed my approach. Every misstep refined my timing. The fire inside me burned steadily, no longer flickering, no longer tentative. I was ready. The world of glittering surfaces and whispered judgments would soon meet the quiet, unyielding force of clarity. The Christmas party had reached its peak, laughter and conversation rising in polished crescendos beneath the chandeliers. I moved through the room with quiet confidence, careful not to draw unnecessary attention, yet acutely aware of every gaze. Heads turned as I passed, some curious, some wary. Then it began. Elellanar Wittmann, seated near the grand fireplace, raised her glass slightly, catching my eye. A small, almost imperceptible nod followed, and in that moment, I knew my subtle efforts had been noticed. Amanda approached, her smile tight, her posture carefully composed. "Margaret," she said, "I hear you've been quite helpful recently." There was an edge in her voice, a mix of caution and disbelief. "Yes," I replied evenly. "It seems there are things only some of us notice, and I've always believed in acting quietly when action is required." My tone was calm, almost conversational, but carried a weight that drew attention. Whispers spread quickly through the room. I could see guests exchanging glances, curiosity replacing the usual judgment. I took a slow step forward, and Elellanar spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice clear and commanding, "I must share an observation. Margaret Sullivan, whom some of you may consider an outsider, demonstrated remarkable presence of mind and courage during a very difficult situation." She gestured subtly toward me, her gaze sharp and approving. She solved a problem that none of us, with all our wealth and resources, could have managed with such grace and practicality. The room went quiet. Amanda's sharp intake of breath was audible, her carefully constructed composure flickering. Her mother, Evelyn, looked momentarily embarrassed, while cousins and friends exchanged surprised glances. The whispers that had once evaluated and dismissed me now paused in the weight of undeniable truth. I remained calm, letting the acknowledgement hang in the air. I had no need to exaggerate, no need to dramatize. The facts spoke for themselves. Each subtle act, each quiet solution, each moment of patient observation, everything I had catalogued and enacted, was now visible through the lens of recognition. Amanda tried to speak, to redirect the attention. Well, yes, but Elellanar held up a hand, silencing her. No, Amanda. I think it is important that people see reality. Wealth and appearance may grant social standing, but they do not define character. Margaret's actions, her courage, and her thoughtfulness are a testament to true value. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Amanda's face paled, her usual confidence slipping. I noticed the subtle shift in her posture, the slightest falter in a carefully maintained image. Her world of glittering appearances had collided with the undeniable force of truth. I felt a quiet warmth in my chest, a mixture of relief, validation, and vindication. Not the vindictive thrill of revenge, but the satisfying confirmation that integrity and action carry their own weight. The room's energy shifted subtly. The judgmental eyes now observed with cautious respect. A few minutes later, as the party continued, Amanda attempted small talk, softer, more tentative. I responded politely, allowing the conversation to flow naturally, letting the previous tension linger just long enough to leave an impression. My son, David, watched with quiet pride from across the room, his smile soft, filled with gratitude I did not need to speak aloud. By the end of the evening, the subtle hierarchy had changed. Not through shouting or confrontation, but through steady, deliberate action. The respect I had earned was not granted. It was undeniable, rooted in reality, witnessed and validated by someone whose judgment mattered most. As I stepped outside later that night, the cold air crisp against my cheeks, I allowed myself a small, private smile. The snow reflected the chandelier lights in faint patterns on the ground, like scattered stars. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of quiet triumph. Not the hollow victory of social one-upmanship, but the deep, grounded satisfaction of being seen for who I truly was. Margaret Sullivan, the widow, the quiet observer, the helper of strangers, had reclaimed dignity through honesty, competence, and courage. The superficiality of appearances had been laid bare, and with it, the family that had once dismissed her now understood. Respect is earned, not assumed. And as the wind brushed against my coat and the faint scent of pine drifted from the estate, I knew that nothing in that polished world could ever diminish the truth I had demonstrated tonight. The days after the Christmas party were quieter than I expected. The snow melted slowly, revealing streets slick with the faint residue of winter. But inside me, something had shifted, a subtle, steady warmth that had little to do with the holiday lights or polite acknowledgments. Amanda's family treated me differently now, though not with overt deference. Their smiles were less measured, their whispers less frequent. I noticed small gestures. A door held open without comment, a question asked genuinely, a toast made with inclusion rather than necessity. These weren't grand gestures, but they carried weight because they were voluntary, born of recognition rather than obligation. I visited Elellanar again, bringing a small tray of homemade cookies. Her smile was approving but not indulgent. "Margaret, you handled everything with integrity," she said quietly. "That takes more strength than most people possess. Remember that." Her words lingered as I walked home, the crisp air filling my lungs. I realized the transformation wasn't in their acknowledgement alone. It was in my own perception of myself. For the first time in years, I felt fully capable of standing in any room, unshaken by judgment or expectation. My value wasn't defined by their recognition, though it was gratifying. It was grounded in what I had proven to myself. Courage, patience, and quiet resolve could hold their own against the sharpest scrutiny. I spent a morning at the local shelter, organizing donations and helping with paperwork. Volunteers greeted me with warmth, unaware of my small social victory at the Sullivan estate, and I was grateful for the familiar rhythm of real work, of tangible impact. The contrast was comforting. The polished world of appearances versus the grounded reality of lives improved by practical action. At home, I revisited my notes, the careful documentation of moments that had once pained me. I no longer felt the ache of exclusion but a sense of completion, as though a ledger had finally balanced. Every insult catalogued, every slight acknowledged, every subtle act of judgment had its place in a narrative that I now controlled. David stopped by that afternoon, a hesitant smile on his face. Mom, I just wanted to say thank you. You didn't have to. I wanted to, I interrupted gently. That's the difference, David. We act when we choose to, not because someone expects it. He nodded slowly, pride and relief mingling in his expression. You really changed the way everyone sees things. Even Amanda. I think she understands now. I shrugged lightly, feeling the familiar flutter of modesty. Perhaps. But it's not about them. It's about knowing what you're capable of. Later, alone in the quiet of my living room, I watched the fading light through the window. The sky had turned a pale lavender. Clouds brushed with the soft glow of the setting sun. I sipped tea, the warmth soothing my chilled fingers. Everything felt still, intentional. I let myself feel the satisfaction of growth, the quiet victory of having acted with honesty and integrity, without compromise. The shift wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic in the way movies often portray revenge or triumph. It was subtle, layered, and enduring. I noticed how I moved differently, how my gaze held steadier, how my small gestures, smiling, listening, acting, carried more weight simply because I knew I could. The world outside remained polished, superficial, often fickle, but I had found my own ground, and it was firm. Walking past the Sullivan estate a few days later, I saw lights still flickering in the windows. I allowed myself a private smile. The world they curated, with all its appearances and judgments, had not changed, but my place in it had. Not because I had demanded recognition, but because truth and quiet courage had revealed it naturally. At night, lying in bed, I listened to the soft hum of the radiator, the wind brushing against the window, and felt a gentle contentment I had not known for years. Life would continue. Small slights, large gatherings, challenges to navigate, but the core truth remained unshakable. I had acted with dignity, with patience, with practical courage, and in doing so, I had reclaimed not just respect, but myself. I often think of that night in the snow. The sharp wind biting my cheeks, the engine coughing back to life under my frozen fingers. That moment, brief and unassuming, became the turning point of everything. It was not grand, not staged, not orchestrated for attention. It was simply a choice. To act with care, to trust my instincts, to hold myself steady when the world seemed indifferent. Life has a way of testing patience, of measuring the quiet strength we seldom acknowledge. I have learned that dignity is not given. It is claimed, often in the smallest, most mundane actions. Helping a stranger, speaking truth softly, standing calmly in the face of judgment. These are not heroic acts in the eyes of the world, but they shape us, define us, and quietly shift the world around us. I realized that my worth had never depended on approval, invitations, or glittering appearances. The world I had stepped into, the Sullivans' polished halls, the whispered judgments, the polite dismissals, was a mirror of superficiality. And yet, I discovered that even a single act, done with intention and integrity, could crack that mirror and reflect something stronger, something real. Now, when I sip my morning coffee or organize parcels for the shelter, I carry that night with me, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. The warmth of action, the clarity of truth, and the quiet courage to act despite fear. These are the measures that matter. Appearances fade. Words can deceive. But integrity, lived consistently, leaves traces that even the most polished surfaces cannot erase. I am Margaret Sullivan, widow, mother, helper, observer, and witness. I have learned that respect is not asked for. It is earned quietly, patiently, with every deliberate choice. And sometimes, in the simplest acts, the lift of a hand, the offering of help, the courage to be oneself, the world finally sees what it has long overlooked. The snow melts, the wind shifts, and the world moves on. But the quiet victories remain, etched in memory and carried forward like a lantern through the dark. And I know now, with a steady heart, that no one can ever take that light from me.